I'm 98 years old, and I can tell you exactly when I knew. Not when I suspected, not when I wondered, when I knew. My name is Arthur Pemberton, and I've been carrying this weight for longer than most people live. She was beautiful. That's what everyone said when we got married in 1951. Margaret had this way of tilting her head when she laughed, and for a while I thought that was enough. I thought beauty and companionship were the same thing. I was 23 and stupid in the way young men are stupid, confusing attraction with understanding, confusing presence with connection. We met at a dance in Hartford. I was fresh out of the service, working at my father's hardware store, and she was a secretary at the insurance company downtown. She wore a blue dress that night. I remember because I've spent 70 years remembering the details of the beginning, trying to find where I missed the signs that were probably there all along. Our courtship was brief, 3 months from that dance to our wedding day. Everyone married quickly back then. You didn't live together first. You didn't have long conversations about your dreams and fears and what you wanted from life. You went to dinners and movies and church socials, and if she laughed at your jokes and you thought she was pretty, well, that seemed like enough to build a life on. The wedding was small. Her mother cried. My father shook my hand and told me I was a lucky man. Margaret smiled for all the photographs, and I believed we were beginning something grand. I think she believed it too. We were both so young, so certain that love was something that just happened to you and stayed forever if you were decent people who went to church and kept a clean house. The first year was fine, better than fine even. We had a small apartment on Maple Street, and everything was new. New furniture we'd saved for, new routines, new ways of being together. She made pot roast on Sundays. I brought home my paycheck every Friday and handed it to her to manage. We didn't argue much because we didn't really talk much about anything that mattered. I think that was the first sign, though I didn't recognize it then. The silence that felt comfortable but was actually just empty. We'd sit at dinner and she'd tell me about her day at the church auxiliary or what Mrs. Henderson said at the market, and I'd nod and eat and tell her about inventory at the store or how my father's back was bothering him. Surface things, safe things. We never talked about whether we were happy or what we wanted from our years together or whether the life we were building was the life either of us had imagined. Looking back now, I don't think I ever really knew what she dreamed about, and I don't think she knew me either. The children came. First Robert in 1953, then Susan 2 years later, then Michael in 1958. Margaret was a good mother, devoted. She kept them clean and fed and got them to school on time. She joined the PTA and baked cookies for every school event and sewed Halloween costumes by hand. I provided for them, worked longer hours as we took over the hardware store completely, made sure there was money for shoes and doctor visits and eventually college. We were busy then, so busy that the silence between us got lost in the noise of raising children. There were soccer games and piano recitals and parent-teacher conferences. There were chickenpox and broken arms and teenage rebellions. We moved through it all side by side, two people performing the tasks of marriage and parenthood with competence, if not joy. But even then, there were moments, small moments that I filed away without understanding what they meant. Like the time Robert asked me if I'd ever wanted to be anything other than a hardware store owner. And before I could answer, Margaret said, "Your father is perfectly content with his life," in a voice that made it clear the conversation was over. The thing is, I'd wanted to be a pilot. Flew reconnaissance during the war and loved every terrifying minute of it. Came home thinking maybe I'd find a way to keep flying, but my father needed help with the store, and Margaret wanted stability. And somehow my dream just got packed away like old clothes you mean to give away but never quite do. I never told her about that dream. Never told her that sometimes I'd drive past the small airport outside town and feel something hollow in my chest. And she never asked. In all our years together, she never once asked me what I'd wanted to be when I was young, before responsibility and duty shaped me into the man I became. The children grew up and left. Robert moved to California. Susan married a lawyer and settled in Boston. Michael went to Seattle for a job in computers, this new technology I never quite understood. Suddenly, it was just the two of us again in a house that felt too big and too quiet. That's when the silence became impossible to ignore. Without the children as a buffer, as a reason to be in the same room, we had nothing to say to each other. We'd sit at dinner, and the quiet would stretch out between us like a physical thing. Sometimes she'd try to fill it with talk about the neighbors or something she'd seen on television, but even her words felt like they were bouncing off a wall, not landing anywhere that mattered. I started staying later at the store, not because there was work to do, but because coming home felt like walking into a museum of a life I didn't quite recognize as mine. The furniture we'd chosen together but never agreed on, the routines we'd established but never questioned, the whole careful structure of our days that looked like a marriage from the outside but felt like something else entirely from within. We never fought. I want to be clear about that. There was no violence, no shouting, no affairs or betrayals. Margaret was a faithful wife. I was a faithful husband. We were both good people, trying to do the right thing. That's what made it all so much harder to name. How do you explain that something is wrong when nothing is technically broken? How do you say you're lonely when there's someone sleeping in the bed next to you every night? I was 63 when it happened. The moment I knew, not suspected, not wondered, but knew with absolute certainty that I had married the wrong person. We were on vacation. The children had insisted we take a trip to celebrate our 40th anniversary. 40 years, 4 decades of building a life together. We went to Maine, stayed at a bed and breakfast on the coast. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of place people go to rekindle romance and remember why they fell in love. We were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset over the ocean. The sky was doing that thing where it turns every shade of orange and pink, the kind of sunset that's so beautiful it almost hurts to look at. And I turned to Margaret to say something about it, to share the moment, and I saw that she was reading a magazine, not even looking at the sky. This incredible display of nature was happening right in front of us, and she was reading about some actresses' diet tips. I didn't say anything. I just sat there and watched the sun go down alone, even though my wife of 40 years was 3 feet away from me. And I realized that this was what our entire marriage had been. 2 people in the same space, going through the motions, but fundamentally alone, never really seeing the same things, never really sharing what mattered. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed of the bed and breakfast, I let myself think the thought I'd been avoiding for decades. I had married the wrong person, not a bad person, not someone cruel or unkind, just wrong for me. We'd built a life together, but we'd never built a connection. We'd raised children and maintained a home and fulfilled all the obligations of marriage, but we'd never truly known each other. We'd never been partners in any real sense. We'd been 2 people who made a decision when we were too young to understand what we were deciding, and then we'd been too stubborn or too scared or too bound by duty to admit it. I thought about leaving. I really did. Sat in my car in the hardware store parking lot more than once and imagined what it would be like to just drive away, start over somewhere, find out who I was without the weight of all those years of silent disappointment. But I was 63 years old. Where would I go? What would I do? And what would it say about me if I left a good woman who'd never done anything wrong except be the wrong person for me? So I stayed. We had 23 more years together after that sunset in Maine, 23 more years of polite conversation and separate lives lived in the same house. She got sick 3 years ago. Cancer. I took care of her the way a husband should. drove her to treatments, sat with her during the hard nights, held her hand when she was scared. Because whatever we weren't to each other, we had history, we had commitment, we had decades of showing up. She died on a Tuesday morning in May. The hospice nurse was there, and Susan had flown in from Boston. Margaret opened her eyes one last time, looked at me, and said, "You were a good husband, Arthur." Then she closed her eyes and was gone. I think about those words a lot. You were a good husband. Not, "I love you." Not, "Thank you for our life together." Just an acknowledgement that I'd fulfilled my role, done my duty, been good enough. And maybe that's all we ever were to each other. Good enough. The house is very quiet now. I still eat dinner at the same time every evening, though I don't always bother cooking real meals anymore. I sit in my chair and look at the photographs on the wall. Our wedding day. The children at various ages, vacations and holidays, and all the markers of a life lived. We look happy in those photographs. Maybe we were, in moments. Or maybe we just looked the way people are supposed to look in photographs. I'm 98 years old now, and here's what I've learned. You can build an entire life with someone and still be strangers. You can fulfill every obligation of marriage and still miss the whole point. You can be a good husband to the wrong wife, and that doesn't make you noble, just makes you lonely in a very particular way. The young people today, they talk about connection and compatibility and finding their person. Sometimes I think they're too picky, too unwilling to compromise, but sometimes I think they're braver than we ever were. Brave enough to ask the hard questions before making the promises. Brave enough to admit when something isn't right instead of spending 70 years pretending it is. I don't tell you this story to make you feel sorry for me. I made my choices. I lived my life. I have children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren, and there's value in that. But I tell you this because I've seen too many people my age with the same look in their eyes. The look that says they know, that says they've been carrying the same weight I have, and they think they're alone in it. They think admitting it would be a betrayal of all those years, all that work, all that trying. But here's the truth I wish I'd understood when I was young enough to do something about it. Companionship without understanding is not better than being alone. It's worse. Because at least when you're alone, you can be honest about the loneliness. You're not pretending. You're not performing a relationship for the world while dying of isolation inside it. If you're young and you're with someone who doesn't really see you, who doesn't ask about your dreams, who sits next to you and misses the sunset, please listen to an old man who knows. That silence doesn't get better with time. It gets louder. It becomes the soundtrack of your life. And one day you'll be my age, looking back at all the years you spent next to someone you never really knew, and you'll wonder why you stayed. And if you're my age, if you've already spent your decades in the wrong marriage, I want you to know you're not alone. I see you. I understand. We did what we thought was right. We honored our commitments. We were good people in difficult situations. That counts for something, but it doesn't change the fundamental loneliness of it, and maybe that's okay. Maybe we can acknowledge both things at once, that we did our best, and that our best still left us aching for something we never found. I'm 98 years old. Margaret has been gone 3 years now. I still set the table for 2 sometimes before I catch myself. Still turn to say something to her before I remember the house is empty. 70 years of habit don't disappear just because someone dies. But you want to know something strange? Sometimes, in the quiet of this empty house, I feel less alone than I did when she was here. Because at least now I don't have to pretend. I don't have to perform contentment I don't feel. I can just be an old man who made a choice when he was too young to know better, and who lived with that choice because he didn't know how not to. That's my story. That's how I knew I'd married the wrong person, not in a moment of anger or betrayal, just in a sunset on a porch in Maine, watching something beautiful while the person I'd promised my life to read a magazine. That's all it took. One moment of clarity after 40 years of fog. I hope you never know that feeling. I hope when you're 98, if you're lucky enough to get here, you're sitting with someone who sees the same sunset you do. Someone who knows your old dreams and your current fears. Someone who makes the silence feel like peace instead of absence. And if you are in the wrong marriage, if you already know but you're afraid to admit it, well, you have to decide for yourself what to do with that knowledge. I can't tell you whether to stay or go. I can only tell you that either choice has a cost. I chose to stay, and I paid in loneliness. Others have chosen to leave, and they've paid in guilt and judgment and starting over. There's no easy answer. There never is when it comes to the big questions of how to live. But at least now you know you're not alone in the knowing. That somewhere in the world there was an old man who understood, who carried the same weight, who made it to 98 with the knowledge that he'd spent his life next to someone he never really connected with, and who wants you to know that your feelings are valid, that the loneliness is real, that you're not failing at marriage just because you feel it. I'm Arthur Pemberton. I'm 98 years old, and I married the wrong person. That's my truth. I've lived with it for most of my life. And now I'm telling you because maybe, just maybe, someone needs to hear that they're not alone in this very particular kind of heartbreak. The kind that looks like success from the outside and feels like failure on the inside. The kind that whispers to you at night that you've wasted your one precious life on someone you were never meant to be with. That's all I have to say. Make of it what you will.